Mike's on. Let's do this thing.
Here we go.
One lap down. We're here. We've got a guest, and that's all I'm going to do for introductions. This is Brad's show tonight.
Yeah, well, we'll see about that. Joe's the one with the content. I've just got the commentary and the questions. But welcome. We've got an evening edition going live on Facebook on our One Lap Down podcast Facebook page. I know we've been using YouTube and all forms of social media. Joe, we're going to nail it one of these days.
Trial and error, baby. Trial and error.
It's working. But really excited to introduce a guest and one of my closest friends, Jason McCormack, tonight. Jason, how are you doing down there in Charleston, South Carolina?
I'm doing good, Brad. We're doing good down here.
Good deal. I know we've been talking about trying to get you on for a little while, and and I think the main reason is because when I started getting into racing and getting into all of these different things with F1 and especially NASCAR this year, you have been the catalyst all along. One of my friends that I know goes ways back, and for everybody watching, and maybe Joe for you too, it was Jason that gave me the ultimatum this past May that when NASCAR returned, I had no other choice but to watch it. So Steph and I watched it with him and his wife Becca, and we had a pretty good streak going there, didn't we, Jason?
It worked out real well. You know, they were the first sport back in any real capacity, I think. And you had texted me because we were all star for sports back in May, right? And you texted me because I think you sounded like you needed a Sherpa to help you through the first NASCAR race there.
Yep, I definitely did. And started learning quite a bit pretty fast, especially with those Wednesday races. That was a lot of fun watching those. I think those ones that kind of got to be just me and you, as those went pretty late into the night. I remember some of our friends watching went to sleep. But no, I won. I think that not only that with the NASCAR, but a lot of other things going on that you follow in racing. So tell us and everybody watching kind of what got you to be a motorsports fan and some of your experiences growing up.
Honestly, it's kind of funny because I got into racing because my dad was into it. And so my dad actually came from Scotland to the United States in the 60s. And they just happened to come into Charlotte, North Carolina. And when you lived in Charlotte, North Carolina in the 60s, you watched NASCAR. And so I think it's funny for a Scottish guy, he jumped on board and he was always into NASCAR. And that's what we would do on Sunday morning before church. We're watching Formula One. And then after church,
Nice. Joe, did we lose Jason for a second there?
Only for a second. We're back.
Gotcha. So, you got F1 before church and NASCAR after church. What do you watch during church? That's the question.
During church, you're just thinking about the next race, right?
There you go. Well, cool. And I guess too, kind of take us through some of the stuff. I remember. In college especially, and I think that's another thing to mention is Jason and I were teammates in college at University of Mary Washington swimming together. And I remember a couple of times late night over at your house watching races in Australia and all of these other things. So, Jason, what other stuff other than F1 and NASCAR, what all are you into?
So it was actually in college, I think, was when I picked up IndyCar. And I think having watched NASCAR through the early 2000s was, I think, a pretty exciting time for racing. But it was a really bad time for IndyCar. And it was in 2008 was when they announced unification of the two IndyCar leagues. And I kind of sat down and said, okay, I'll watch, I'll buy. And I was hooked. It was it always kind of occupies this odd space between Formula One and NASCAR, where at times it feels kind of like it's not quite NASCAR, but it's also not quite Formula One. And, the more I started to read into it, just the history was fascinating. And there's a certain drama to IndyCar that I don't think you get in either NASCAR or Formula One. And, so, I started watching it, like I said, 2008. I think I went to see them at Richmond in 2008, 2009. And it's something else to watch in IndyCar.
Yeah.
Jason, what do you attribute that that extra drama too. I mean, that's the one division of motorsports that I've just been really bad at getting into. Last year was definitely my most involved. But I'm just curious, from someone who's been watching it, how that drama you're talking about, how is it different? What makes it different? Because, sometimes they're on an oval track too. So is it, what makes it a little bit different than a NASCAR stock car going around?
Yeah, and I think it's very different, right? Like NASCAR, there's this element almost like pro wrestling. Like you love watching the cars beating on each other. The drivers get hot and they get out and they start going at it. It's very different when you're watching Formula One. That there's very much this backroom political drama to it. That you're always watching, who the teams are going to pick next. There are kingmakers, there are big power struggles, and you're watching a very different show. But in IndyCar, I think the best way I can think of it is it's almost like the drama of watching a space launch. Like in NASCAR, I think there are drivers that you cheer against, and I was surprised when I went to my first Indy 500 that nobody's really cheering against any driver there, and the danger level is so high, and it feels kind of like when you're watching a space launch where you're just cheering for everything to go right, kind of. And I think that's been a very underlying theme in IndyCar is really that it's the last really dangerous form of motorsports. Just thinking of the way that there used to be, I mean, in like the 60s and 70s, there would be one or two Formula One drivers die every year. That was just normal. And not that anybody wants to see that. You want to see everybody survive, but there is just that extra element of danger in IndyCar that you just don't get.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot after the Grosjean crash, right, Joe? And like that was one of the things that was just tough to swallow, because in our time getting into F1, that was the worst that we had seen. Mm-hmm. And you're right, Jason, we watched these like Williams documentaries from the 60s and 70s, and they show cars going into the stands, killing spectators. I mean, it's just crazy, all the stuff that's with it. And I hadn't really thought about that before, about how IndyCar is so much more dangerous than these other ones right now, especially when they go 3 and 4 wide and all of that.
And I think of the last time I was in Indy, before a NASCAR race, you'll see they'll bring in a pastor and they'll do an invocation, and they'll bless the cars, the drivers, and you pray for safety. But when there was something different about the invocation before the Indy 500, because you felt like you're clearing out the track and you're getting all these people off the track, and you're just going to have 33 people on the track, and one of them could get very hurt. And you don't feel that. I know there's no easy way to say it, but that's the I think, like I said, it's like watching a space launch, right? Like, that there is this really high risk to it. And in that regard, you're not really cheering against any of the drivers. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, I think it's worth noting too, I know the answer to this question, but I know you've been to an Indy 500. How many have you been to, and have you been to any of those IndyCar races, like any of the other big tracks?
I've been to 3 Indy 500s, 1 Daytona 500. I've been to Talladega. I've been to NASCAR and IndyCar at Richmond. I've been to Charlotte at least once. I think only once, but and then I did manage to get out to the Washington, D.C. Grand Prix when that was a thing. And I went to the Baltimore Grand Prix.
I remember the Baltimore Grand Prix because right down there, I remember I went to an Orioles game and they were starting to set up for it. And they had the barricades and all of that through the streets. That must have been wild to see.
That was a lot of fun. And that was, another thing that I love about IndyCar is it's a lot more accessible because it doesn't have the massive fan base that NASCAR has. So, especially at the Baltimore Grand Prix, it was pretty easy to get my hands on pit passes, and my roommate and I went, and we just, you get to hang out with the cars, the drivers, and it's pretty unreal when you're just kind of walking around and it's like, oh, there's Roger Penske.
So is that a clear runaway favorite for best experience as a fan, or it's something about being at Talladega for a NASCAR race? Just take it.
Oh man, I love Talladega is fun because it's when you're down there in Alabama, you're getting the real NASCAR crowd. That was a trip. I love the Indy 500 is unlike anything else, and I think that's the thing. Like, I got curious about IndyCar, and once you get into the 500, it's over. That's just, the Daytona 500 felt like a complete letdown by comparison.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Big statement.
It is. It's because it's not so much a race as an event. It's an entire month-long festival of the town of Indianapolis. Anytime you're getting, Formula One news, you can read some of the the German publications, the British publications. There's a lot of outlets you can get for it. Most of your IndyCar news still comes from the Indianapolis Star. They report on it locally. You do feel this big local push when you're there, and I've never been to any other event that actually packs 300,000 people into a stadium. It's nuts.
Yeah, that sounds pretty incredible. I do have one question that might be kind of boring. Going back to the safety conversation from a fan standpoint, there was a big hubbub about the halo being introduced in F1, and obviously IndyCar has gone to another level with the aero screen, which I think is even better, frankly, instead of having that big divider in between your line of sight like F1 does. But we saw the benefits of that with Grosjean's crash. You're in the IndyCar fan world. Was there any type of pushback on going against the true open wheel nature of being open cockpit to this aero screen?
I feel like I probably represent the same as everybody else. I hate it, but I love it. It definitely goes against everything that the car was. But I don't ever want to see the drivers get hurt. And yeah, if that's what it takes to make the sport safer, then yeah, absolutely, we need it. And I just kind of hope, like, there are some old open wheel cars that did have some semblance of a windshield, and I guess I always kind of hope that maybe the windscreen gets a bit of a facelift soon. But overall, it's not bad.
Yeah, I think that it was interesting to come into the sport as these things are introduced. And I did have an opportunity to get to one of the big tracks you did mention, in Texas Motor Speedway, that we've talked about, and one of the final years without that aero screen in IndyCar. And but getting into the sport, it just seems so obvious to me. Like, of course you want something there, and then you watch the computer generated models of Grosjean going into that divider and not really wanting to wonder what would have happened had that not been there. So it is interesting. I think they're definitely an old guard and new guard.
Hey, we actually have. Sorry, Jason, I didn't mean to cut you off, but for the first time ever, we have some live comments. Some people asking questions, which is great. Longtime friend of the show, Ed Smith. I think he wants maybe some more details on the major difference between the Daytona 500 and the Indy 500. I know you touched on, some of that pageantry, but the day of, is there a major difference in being in the stands for one as opposed to the other?
Sure. Daytona is, it's a very different track, right? Like, you go to Talladega, and I think my brother was driving that day, and he was wondering if we were going to the right place. And I told him, no, you drive 2 hours past anything, and then you drive another 2 hours, and then you're at Talladega. So you're having a big Alabama party in a field, right? Daytona is right there on the strip. And you're across the street from Bass Pro Shops, and it feels very commercial. When you get there, I think the pre-race is just it feels a lot more like any other NASCAR race. And I think that's kind of the big thing, is it just feels a lot like any other NASCAR race. The Indy 500, you know that there's a much bigger driver purse. They bring in a bunch of extra drivers. So I think full-time, the series runs about 22 to 28 drivers off and on. And they always line up 33 for the 500. So they're bringing in a couple of, it's a bit gimmicky sometimes. You know, it'll be maybe like one or two guys who retired a couple of years ago, one or two guys who, you know, like Fernando Alonso came over and raced the 500.
That's right.
Yeah, so they're always trying to get some sort of story, but it's cool because, you know, you talk about like a NASCAR all-star race, like no, IndyCar is bringing in like all the all-stars, even the guys who don't normally race. But it's the way that the whole town gets behind it. I think, you know, it's Memorial Day weekend. So if you live near a beach, you go to the beach. In Indianapolis, there is no beach. Everybody goes to the track. And, you know, you'll be out there. Half the crowd doesn't even know there's a race going on. They have the Snake Pit is the big EDM concert that they have in the infield. I think that's like 30, 40,000 people. And you can talk to them after the race and they don't know anything about the race.
That is definitely a different environment, to say the least. Let's get to this other one from someone you might know, someone named Becca McCormack. So she brings up a very good question, actually. What do you think about Formula One drivers switching over to the IndyCar series? We've seen back in the day, Nigel Mansell did a great job of it. He won the championship in both Formula One and IndyCar. Grosjean is flirting with it. I don't know if he's officially, you know, switched over to IndyCar for this series. They were talking about Checo Perez, if he didn't keep an F1 job, was going to do it. What are your thoughts on that transition from F1s to IndyCars?
I mean, it's always been great for IndyCar, but that's because IndyCar is playing second fiddle. You know, Formula One is the show. And I mean, the good thing for IndyCar is that Formula One churns through drivers so fast that there are so many talented drivers who should be in Formula One, but just couldn't put a sponsor together. And, you know, they end up in IndyCar. I mean, I'm wearing my nice Alex Rossi shirt here.
I was hoping to get a little cameo with that on there.
Yeah. So, I mean, he got his start in IndyCar when he got chewed out of Formula One. You know, he got 4 starts for, I think it was Marussia at the time, or 5 starts, I think. And, I mean, he's proven in IndyCar that he really deserves to be with the best. And, you know, he couldn't get funding, so he got chewed out. I mean, it doesn't help when you got Lewis Hamilton winning everything. So there's not really, you know, you're not going to get like 4 or 5 winners throughout the season, right?
We just talked about on the podcast, is Lewis Hamilton driving or not? Contract.
He's in a precarious position because I think he needs Mercedes a lot more than they need him. I mean, if he walked away gracefully and wanted to do IndyCar, that would be great, but it's not doing him any favors for his career. At that point, he's just doing what he wants with his retirement. You know, it's not going to get bigger for him than Mercedes. And if he doesn't get this contract put together, I mean, I think he will, but if he doesn't get it put together, then that's it. Like, he's into retirement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I do want to switch gears a little bit, and it doesn't help that you were bashing the Daytona 500 because that was my high side today on our podcast. We're talking about it, getting excited to get in there and and kind of get back to racing. Right? It feels like it's been so long, but maybe not as long as it's been. And I feel like the timing of having you on was great because we just finished up the Rolex 24 this past weekend. I know the 3 of us all watched chunks of it. Nobody watched the full 24 hours, I don't think. We all slept at some point Saturday night. But, and then we've got Daytona 500 coming up in just a couple of weeks. And it's a place that I've been always excited to hear about your triathlon down there. So you want to talk about not just your Daytona 500 experience, but maybe what your experience down there on the track has been like.
Sure. I mean, I don't want to bash the Daytona 500. It is fantastic. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, it just yeah. The thing that I love about Daytona is they really do have an awesome facility there. Some of the NASCAR tracks you can go to really feel pretty run down, like you're just sitting on some cheap bleachers. Just all the way around the facility, Daytona is top notch. So yeah, they started putting this together 2-3 years ago now that they hold a triathlon there, and it's pretty different doing running and biking on a NASCAR track. It's running it's kind of painful because you don't really go anywhere, right? Like you can see all the way down the backstretch, but I mean it's the perfect facility for triathlon because they got Lake Lloyd right in the middle there, so you get to swim, bike, and run all within there. They've got the infield road course where they can you can put together a couple miles of course, not just the like 2 miles and change of the oval. It's just kind of funny because you get there and obviously you want to get up on the high banks and riding a bike at 25 miles an hour it isn't going to cut it. You can't climb the banking.
Joe, who was it we were talking to getting to ride in a van around Daytona? And
well, Ellen did it at Charlotte. Ellen rode in a van at Charlotte, and they had to keep a certain speed around the banking so they didn't tip over. So
we need you just to ride your bike a little bit faster, Jason. You're being really hard, but maybe put in a little more work to get the speed to go on the high banking turns at Daytona.
Oh yeah. Just gotta pump it up a few miles an hour.
Yeah, we'll go, and I think that I know that we'll try to connect again, watching the race together virtually while you're down in Charleston and I'm up here in Lynchburg, and Joe's going to have to work that day, so we got to find a way to throw him into the mix now.
I'm going to figure out a way to still get involved, even though I have to be here. I promise. There's a way to do it.
I know you can do it. I know you can do it, Joe. But Jason, give us some maybe some previews and hot takes with the NASCAR season just around the corner. Oh. Any big thoughts on your end?
NASCAR season. I mean, I'm super curious to watch what happens with Bubba Wallace. It's a couple big question marks there. I actually thought that he was doing pretty well before, but I think that 43 has been kind of lagging for years. But then it's like, is he actually in a better car? My understanding is that his new car is going to be prepared by Gibbs. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, that's a huge ask for Denny Hamlin to jump out on his own with his own team. And I don't know if it's going to be weird that Denny is still racing for Joe Gibbs. I don't know to what degree they're getting support. I know, Tony Stewart had but he was getting his, I think he was getting engines through Hendrick at the time.
Yeah. What about, Joe and I kind of recapped at the end of the year, people that we thought were going to be breakout stars, most likely to dethrone Chase Elliott. You got any opinions on who that might be, who the one to watch this year might be?
Boy, I'm going to play it safe and just say like Kevin Harvick, what can he do? The guy is at the top of his career. He's the Tom Brady of NASCAR at the moment. He just doesn't have his championship yet.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Joe, you got any other questions for Jason?
Well, I was it's kind of out of sequence now, but I was really curious about the engine building that you mentioned earlier today to me, Brad.
It's a good transition. We talked about the triathlon, building his own engine, riding his bike out on the high banking turns of Daytona. Now, go ahead and ask about this. I think it's important for us to get into on our podcast.
I think so. I mean, we got some motorheads that are watching, I'm sure, even though a lot of us are switching to thinking about building our own computers so we can make money in sim racing. But you're doing something that has got to be painstaking and certainly something that takes time. Can you walk us through the decision-making process behind doing something like this?
So, well, first off, I think everybody's picked up a new hobby in quarantine, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I love asking people about some of the weird stuff that people are picking up. I have an old 2006 Acura RSX that I've just been maintaining it, and it's in good shape. But she's got 160,000 miles, so it's getting to the point where I got to figure out, am I pushing it high mileage or not? And at a certain point, if you're going to go past 200,000 miles with a car, you better start rolling up your sleeves and doing some work with it. I love the reliability that you get from Honda. And so that was my thing in quarantine. I just started reading up about the car, and started to realize some stuff that I had maybe been neglecting, some stuff that I can do myself. And so I started putting together a build plan and realizing that maybe it wasn't quite as out of reach as I had maybe thought. The thing is, like, depending on how long I keep it, I am going to need probably another engine around 250 to 300,000 miles. And so I started reading up on it has the Honda K series engine, which is a pretty ubiquitous engine and is, as far as I can tell, pretty, I'm not going to say easy or friendly, but it seems like a good engine to start with. And it's something I think I've always been fascinated with, the way that cars work. I've definitely always enjoyed reading the tech behind Formula One. And, the idea that I could possibly just get my hands dirty and start doing this myself it's intriguing. It's a little daunting, and I don't know how far I'll be able to get with it. I still feel like, I might get to a point where I build the whole thing and then run oil and blow it up. But
yeah, you're going to have to keep, like, I think that would be the most nerve-wracking part for me. It's like, okay, let's turn it on. Did I do this correctly or not?
I picture it being like a Dr. Frankenstein moment, just flipping that switch. But I think I'm still reading up, still learning. I'm a little ways away from touching the engine because the engine that's in there is still good, and right now it's suspension. Got to do suspension and brakes, and more and more I'm finding a laundry list of things to change out or upgrade.
Cool.
I want to ask one more question about that, especially like talking to older folks, people like my dad's age. They'll mention working on cars, carburetors, engines, things of that nature. Do you feel like there's a window, like a year, where you probably aren't going to be able to do much of anything on your own because of all the chips and all the way they lock that thing down? So you have to take it to the Ford garage or the Honda garage so they can charge you bukus of money to work on something.
Yeah, I mean, even with the K series engine that I want to work on, I can do a lot of work myself and then just get it running, and then I have to take it to the shop to get it programmed.
Right.
Yeah, I know the big thing for me is it's around that 2011 to like 20 started phasing out manual transmissions. And if you're gonna put in a bunch of work on a car, it might as well be a manual. Plus, automatics are that much more complicated, and there's a lot more stuff that can go wrong. So, yeah, it also kind of became something where it's like, if you want to keep driving a stick shift, you better learn how to maintain it, because you're not going to be able to get them much longer.
All right, I think we got the start of our own team here. I think we.
I don't know what my part would be. Maybe brand manager.
Guy.
Maybe that's the only thing I feel like I could contribute at this point, because I obviously cannot build an engine or build a car. If my video game experience says anything about me as a driver, I'm out for that role. But maybe I can work on the branding and all of that. Definitely need you as like the race manager. Keep you on the headset, the communication, all of that.
Yeah. They always need a guy to pull the windshield tape off. So You can do that.
I don't know about that one. I definitely, after talking to JP, it could not be the guy that fuels up the car. I don't know if you watched that one, but we got to talk to a guy, and that's his job on the pit crew. And I had no idea how heavy those things were in NASCAR.
Oh yeah, no, that's tough.
Over
Think about it, like 2 cans for like 14 seconds. You gotta do that. It's pretty incredible what they do.
That's big time. That's big time. Well, good. Joe, anything else on your end? Any other questions? I know we've had a good 30 minutes here talking to Jason. This has been
I definitely don't want to go too detailed. We got to leave some room for another interview. This has been fun.
We got to get some back in, Jason, especially once we get into season and we've got NASCAR, F1, IndyCar, all those things. We'd love to pull you in from takes there. So kind of want to give you one last question and give you the final word. But, we've got NASCAR coming up soon, IndyCar and F1 not far behind. What season is going to give us the most entertainment this year going into the summer?
Most entertainment this year. I think NASCAR is primed for a good year. I think IndyCar is just going to keep marching on, doing its thing. Obviously, I'm going to say IndyCar because I think they've got really good parity with a number of drivers who can come and do big things. I'll tell you, my biggest storyline this year is going to be McLaren. I think that they are coming up in IndyCar, and supposedly in Formula One, there are some people calling them to challenge Mercedes this year, and I think that's going to be good for all motorsports if McLaren, get their footing in both IndyCar and F1.
See, I paid him to say that on the podcast. My favorite team, and there we go.
I agree with that. I think that's a great point, actually. I think McLaren and IndyCar is going to make a lot of noise. They got the drivers, and whether we want to make fun of the situation or not, Fernando's time working for them in the Indy 500 certainly helped them gain some footing in that world. So I think you're onto something there. That'd be interesting to watch.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, we'll kind of wrap it up as we get into the evening hours. But Jason, thank you so much for joining us. I know you and I get to talk quite a bit. We're going to allude to in the podcast some of our video game time together, but we can hit all of that stuff at a different point, talking about quarantine hobbies. But
see you on the seas.
Yeah, there you go. There we go. But Jason, thank you so much. Joe, this has been fun. A good day for us after a week off last week. And thank you for everybody tuning in. Looks like we had some people watching live on Facebook and hopefully catching up later. But appreciate everybody watching. And for the One Lap Down podcast, I'm Brad Dunn.
I'm Joe Hutzler.
And our guest,
Jason, thanks for having me.
There you go. There it is. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jason.